Shalom Hartman Institute for the first of our Rabbinic Webinar Series for the year 5777. I'm Alan Abbey, and with us tonight is Dr. Micah Goodman, who I don't think anybody who is watching needs an introduction. If you have seen him before, you know how great this talk will be. If you haven't seen him before, I promise you, we don't do any hype on this. This will be an amazing talk.
Yeah, don't put your hopes up. Yeah.
I just want to tell you a few things about the program. Micah will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll take some questions from you. You can post them on the chat line, which is on the webpage where you're watching this. And for the first time, by the way, we're broadcasting this program live on our Facebook page. And if you happen to see it on Facebook, or you just joining us, you're not sure what this is a live program where Micah Goodman will talk about Rosh Hashana. And during the program, we invite you to post your questions, tell us who you are, tell us where you're watching the program, and we will ask them, I will relay the questions to Micah after his talk. So we'll leave as much time as we can for questions and answers afterward, so please do send us your questions. And now, without any further delay, I want to give you Dr. Micah Goodman, a research fellow at the Hartman Institute and a very prominent speaker and thinker in the Jewish world today. Micah, it's all yours.
Hi, Shalom. So what we'll try to do today is speak about and think about Rosh Hashanah. But I want to take that literally. I want to think about Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Traktat Rosh Hashanah. I hope you read Masechet Rosh Hashanah in Mishnayot, in the Mishnah. One of the problems with studying Mishnah is that many of us are trained to think about Mishnah as Mishnayot, meaning we study a Mishnah at a time. And that's very powerful. You dive into a Mishnah, you try to understand the Mishnah, you examine the Mishnah, sometimes through the Gemara, sometimes on its own. But there's something we miss out when we do that. And that is the linkage between all the Mishnayot. Sometimes it's rewarding not to study a Mishnah at a time, but to study the entire Masechet, the entire Traktat. I know it's very ambitious, but this is what I'll try to do tonight. To try to understand the structure of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Now on the surface, this is very easy, because Masechet Rosh Hashanah has only 4 chapters, and the first 2 chapters roughly speak about Kiddush HaChodesh. And the second 2 chapters speak about Yichot Shofar, all issues surrounding the shofar. What is a kosher shofar? What are the laws of Tkiat Shofar? And what were the repercussions of Tkifat Shofar in the ancient world? So we have 2 poles to Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, the issue, the whole project of declaring the new month, the new moon. And we have another declaration of Tkiyat Shofar, which is understood as a declaration of God's sovereignty. You blow the shofar to declare that God is king. So we have 2 declarations in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. That there is a new month and that God is king. Now I would like, after saying that, and saying that there's 2 parts to Masechet Rosh Hashanah, I'd like to dive into Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, to the Mishnayot of Kiddush HaChodesh, and then see what Tkiyat Shofar is about, and maybe notice a very, very deep tension between these parts. So first and foremost, the first 2 chapters of Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, what are they about? Well, Kiddush HaChodesh is the attempt of the rabbis to, how do we measure time? How do we experience time? How do we build the Jewish calendar? Now, obviously, it seems like they decided to locate Yichot Kiddush HaChodesh and Masechet Rosh Hashanah because that's how you know when Rosh Hashanah is. Rosh Hashanah is in Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. But it's a very complicated system. Why is it a complicated system? Because we're experiencing time by observing a natural phenomena. The birth of the moon. Now, as we all know, in the middle of the Hebrew month, the moon is a full moon. And then it shrinks shrinks, shrinks, until it completely disappears. There's a few moments, a few hours, sometimes more, before the beginning of the month, that there is absolutely no moon in the sky. It disappears. By the way, this led ancient mythologies to describe the moon as a sun that every month dies and then it's born again. When is it born? When the moon is born, when we see the birth of the moon, the God that died, disappeared, is born again. By the way, I think this mythology is carried in Mishnaic Hebrew because it calls the birth of the moon the birth, molad, as if the moon was born again. Now that moment of the birth of the moon is a moment that we have to capture and declare, and then the month begins. Now why is this very sophisticated? Is this problematic? Because, you see, there isn't 30 days in a month. There's 29 days, 12 hours, and about 43 minutes average in a month. But you can't declare a new month every month after 20. Rosh Chodesh is after 29 days, 12 hours, 43 minutes, which is, I think, 700 and something chalakim. They used to divide an hour into 1,040 parts, chalakim, and the month is 700 and something chalakim. So I checked, I Googled it, it's 43 and something minutes. So you can't, so what they do is, some months are 29 days, some months are 30 days. They try to balance it out. And which month will be 29 days and which month will be 30 days, that is up to the rabbis to decide. And we decide that by spotting the moon when it's born and then declaring that it was born. Okay? So, there's a problem. And that is that Mishnah Masechet Rosh Hashana, wants the entire Jewish people living in Israel to be involved in this project. How do I know? Well, the Mishnah, in the mini Mishnayot, it offers a lot of motivation for people all over Israel to be moon observers, to search for the moon that night where the moon disappeared, and to wait for the moment where it's born, and then to run to Jerusalem, to the Beit Din, to offer their testimony that they've seen the birth of the moon. And if we have two people giving that testimony, and their testimony is accepted, then the Beit Din says, Mekudash, 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 meaning the moon was born, a month was born, and we enter a whole new month. So that's the process. Let me summarize this. It's an attempt to turn the observing of the moon into a national project, and the Beit, having all the people trying to be witnesses that will run to the Beit Din, offer their testimony, and the Beit Din will declare a new month. So what kind of incentives does it offer? So the Mishnah says they do big feasts for the witnesses. So while you're waiting in line in the Beit Din in Jerusalem, you can, you'll have a good meal. The Mishnah also says, you see there's a problem. Let's say 500 people came. And the first two, their testimony declared the month. You know what the Beit Din is supposed to do? They're supposed to hear all 500 of them. Now these are testimonies we don't need to declare the birth of the month. So why do they do that? Kedei sheyiyu regilin lavo. So the people won't feel like they came for nothing. They were still seen. I mean, they were seen by the celebrities of the time. They were seen by the Rashei Batei Din in Jerusalem, by Rabbi Yeshua, by Rabbi Akiva, by Rabban Gamliel. So there's a whole incentive system trying to seduce the people to search for the moon and run to Jerusalem. Why is it so important for the Mishnah I mean, what they could have done is create professional astronomers, which we had in the old days. And their role is to search for the sun, for the new moon. They could see it. They know what they're seeing because they're professional. They go to the Beit Din and they offer their testimony. But you see, the Beit Din decided it won't be about professionals. It will be a project of the people. Now, I don't know why it's so important for them to involve maximum amount of people in the project of moon watching and running to Jerusalem and the declaring the birth of the month, but I want to offer a drasha. Within Masechet Rosh Hashana, we have the famous Mishnah on, this is in chapter 3 of Masechet Rosh Hashana, we have the famous Mishnah of Moshe. And you all know this Mishnah. It describes how in the first war with the Amalekites, Joshua was fighting the Amalekites and Moses was on the top of the hill. And it says, every time Moses lifted his hands, the Hebrews were beating the Amalekites, and every time his hands were down, the Amalekites were winning the Hebrews. So the Mishnah obviously asks, "V'chiyadav shel Moshe osot milchama?" Is it the magical effect of the hands of Moses that is leading the people, leading the Hebrews to victory? And obviously the Mishnah says, no. It's while he is lifting his hands, you're seducing the people to look at his hands. And when they're looking at his hands, they're looking at the sky. And when they're looking at the sky, they're accepting God's sovereignty. Yonah Franke, the famous scholar of Agadah, he says many times stories are in the middle of halachic conversations because they somehow contain within them the depth of the halachic conversation. I want to offer a drasha, a sermon. I don't know if it's pshat, but I find it beautiful. Maybe the entire project of Kiddush HaChodesh is an attempt to seduce the people to keep their heads up, to look at the sky, to search for the moon, to somehow observe the power of the cosmos, to accept God's sovereignty. Maybe they wanted to create a society where people are keeping their heads up, looking at the stars. Sumahom einechem uru mi bara eile. Is that an interesting possibility? That the rabbis wanted a society that people don't have their heads down, but their heads up? Maybe the whole project of Kiddush HaChodesh is an attempt to seduce people to keep their heads up. That's a thought. I want to hang on to it. I'll move back to it towards the end and offer an alternative reading on Yadav Shel Moshe. And with that, I would like to ask, I think, what I find the most troubling and the most important question of the first chapters of Masechet Rosh Hashana. And it's the following. I'd like to read from Masechet Rosh Hashana, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Hey. Masechet Rosh Hashana, chapter 1, Mishnah 5. It says here the following. It follows a Mishnah that's saying that in order to offer a testimony that you saw the molad, you saw the new moon, you're allowed to violate the laws of Shabbat. And now it says the following. Now, by the way, that itself is interesting. That in order, let's say I was in Lod, and I see the birth of the moon, so I'm allowed to get on a cab in Shabbat, drive to Jerusalem. Or the problem is not only, the problem then, it wasn't driving, the problem was that you leave Tchum Shabbat. You're now allowed to leave a certain space in Shabbat. But for Kiddush HaChodesh, for sacred time, you're allowed to violate the prohibition on space. So you leave wherever you are, Lod, you run to Jerusalem, and you declare, and you give an offer testimony of what you saw. So it's interesting that the rabbis are willing to sacrifice the sanctity of the Shabbat in order to give the people the possibility of being the ones that their testimony will declare the birth of the new month. But this Mishnah is even more weird. It says like this in Mishnah Hey. Bein shenir'eh be'alil, bein shelo nir'eh be'alil, michalelin alav et Shabbat. Ben shenir'eh be'alil, ben shelo. What does nir'eh be'alil? That the moon, the new moon, be'alil means is clear. And if it's clear, I could assume that everyone is seeing it. That there's someone in Jerusalem right now that doesn't have to violate the Shabbat that is seeing it. I mean, lo nir'eh be'alil. Let's say there's not a clear sight. Let's say there's clouds in the sky and we can't see the moon. And I have a rare glimpse because there's a crack in the clouds, a rare glimpse, and I see the moon. I could assume maybe I'm the only one in the land of Israel that saw the new moon. It's all up to me. I violate the Shabbat. I go to Jerusalem. I offer my testimony. I save the new month. But that's not what the Mishnah says. What happens if the nir'eh be'alil? It's a clear night and a clear sky, and we see the new moon. I could assume, I could know, almost positive, that it's not up to me. It's not up to my testimony that will have a new month. And yet, you violate the Shabbat. Now, the Mishnah is even more radical than that. It says in Mishnah Tet, in the last Mishnah of chapter 1, it says, Misha ra'ay chodesh, ve'ino yochol lehalech. Let's say I saw the month in Lod, and I have a physical problem. I can't walk. Molichin oto al chamor, afilu b'mita, ve'im tzodeh lehem, lokchim b'yadam maklot. You're allowed to take stuff with you. It's a broad violation of Shabbat. ואם הייתה דרך רחוקה, לוקחים בידם מזונות, שעל מהלך יום ולילה ויום, מחללים את השבת, ויוצאים לעדות החודש. Let's say, not only am I allowed to violate the Shabbat, I'm allowed to take, if I can't go there by myself, I'm allowed to take people with me. They will violate Shabbat, so I'll have the possibility to lekadesh the chodesh. I want to put this together halachically. Here's the troubling situation. Im nir'eh be'alil, if the moon is seen clearly, the chances that it'll be up to my testimony are very slim. So I would say it is fair to say that according to the Mishnah, al sfek kiddush chodesh mechalelin et Shabbat. Safek, meaning if I have doubt that it's up to me, with no doubt, with absolute certainty, I violate the Shabbat. But you see, it's even worse. I'm allowed to have someone that comes with me, and also that to help me out, because if I can't get myself, also he or she violates the Shabbat. Let's put this way. Al sfek kiddush chodesh, your schlepper can for certainty violate the Shabbat. It is so clear that the Mishnah is creating a hierarchy where the sanctity of the month has more weight than the sanctity of the week of the Shabbat. Now I want to ask, what does this mean? That the Mishnah is willing to sacrifice the Shabbat in order to make room for Kiddush HaChodesh, for the act of Kiddush HaChodesh. What does that mean? And in order to answer that question, I think we have to understand deeper, how did Chazal mean? What was the significance of Kiddush HaChodesh in the eyes of Chazal? And for this, I think they offer here a very important story that I'm sure you all know, so I'll study it quick in a quicker manner. It describes, I'm now skipping to chapter 2, Mishnah Chet. דמות צורות לבנות היו לו לרבן גמליאל בטבלה ובכותל בעלייתו. שם מראה בהן את הידיעות ואומר רק כזה ראית או כזה. Rabban Gamliel had a way to investigate the witnesses. He had different images of a moon, of a new moon, and he asked them, did it look like this or did it look like this? And that's how he could know if what they saw was a new moon or maybe it was an illusion of a moon. Maybe it was a part of a cloud. So he understood his astronomy. And he used his images to figure out if the sight of the witnesses, it was the sight of the moon and not an illusion of the moon. I remind you, I'm in chapter 2, Mishnah 8. מעשה שבאו שתיים ואמרו ראינוהו שחרית במזרח וערבית במערב. Two people come and they offer certain testimony where they saw him in the morning, where they saw the moon in the evening. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri adei shekerim. They are false witnesses. And he, כשבאו ליבנה, קיבלן רבן גמליאל. Even though Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri thought they were wrong, Rabban Gamliel and Yavne thought that they were right. I'm skipping to the end of the Mishnah. I'm very aware of our time. And I just want to notice that Rabbi Yoshua did not accept the conviction of Rabban Gamliel, which is the leader of the Beit Din. Meaning, here's our situation. Rabbi Yoshua thinks that these witnesses are false witnesses. Therefore, what they saw was not the moon. Therefore, it's not a new month. Rabban Gamliel thought they are true witnesses. Therefore, it is a new month. So, there is a disagreement between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabban Gamliel. When does the month begin? And the Mishnah lets us understand that Rabbi Yoshua, astronomically speaking, is right. According to nature, to objective nature, that wasn't a moon. And yet the Beit Din declared it is a month. The moon was not born. But the Beit Din declared that the month was born. So Rabbi Yoshua is probably right. And now he has to make a decision. What do I do? Do I start celebrating Rosh Chodesh, the new month, when it will be the natural beginning of the month? Or do I start celebrating the new month when the Beit Din, where human beings decided this is the beginning of the month? Who decides when does the month begin? Nature or human decision? The new month or the new moon or the declaration of the Beit Din that it is a new month? So Rabbi Yoshua has a problem. Mishnah Tet, Mishnah Tet, Rabban Gamliel decides to put Rabbi Yoshua to a test. Now I'm in chapter 2, Mishnah Tet. שלח לו רבן גמליאל, גוזרני עליך שתבוא אצלי במקלך ובמאותיך ביום הכיפורים שחל להיות בחשבונך. According to your new calendar, because you didn't accept my testimony, the testimony of these witnesses, I want you to come visit me in your Yom Kippur. Meaning, violate your calendar and accept my calendar. Meaning, violate cosmic time and accept time created by human beings. Halach v'matzor Rabbi Akiva metzeh. Rabbi Akiva sees he's very upset. He's perplexed. He doesn't know what to do. אמר לו, יש לי ללמוד שכל מה שעשה רבן גמליאל עשוי, שנאמר, אלה מועדי אדוני, מקראי קודש אשר תקראו אותם, בין בזמנם, בין שלא בזמנם, איני מועדות אלא אלו. Rabban Gamliel is offering a drasha of Vayikra Kaf Gimel. It says in Vayikra Kaf Gimel, אלה מועדי אדוני, מקראי קודש אשר תקראו אותם במועדם. I think this is how Rabbi Akiva reads this pasuk. אלה מועדי אדוני, נקודותיים. How do you say נקודותיים? Two dots.
Oh, ellipsis, yes, dot, 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 yes.
No, not
et
that.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
No. אלה מועדי אדוני, נקודותיים.
Oh, colon, yes, a colon.
Colon, okay.
Colon, sorry.
Thank you. אלה מועדי אדוני, נקודותיים, colon, אשר תקראו אותם במועדם. Meaning, what are God's moadim? The moadim that we decide that they are the moadim. Now, there is another reading that I found in the Sifra. In the Sifra, they offer, in Midrash Halacha, on this pasuk, Asher tikra'u otam. In the Sifra, it says, Asher tikra'u atem. Meaning you change the way we read Aleph, Tet, Mem. It's not Asher tikra'u otam, Asher tikra'u atem. There is an attempt here to say that what the Beit Din, what human beings observing time do, our real job is not to expose the moment, the cosmic moment when the month begins, but to decide when is the moment that the month begins. We're not observers of reality. In some sense, we are creators of reality. Rabbi Yeshua accepted this radical idea, and he violated objective time in order to accept human subjective time. What he did was, he goes to Rabban Gamliel in his Yom Kippurim, trying to say, Yom Kippurim is not defined by nature. It is defined by human conviction, by human decision. And obviously the Mishnah ends, I'm jumping to the end, I'm skipping to the end of the Mishnah. He walks in to the Beit Midrash of Rabban Gamliel in Yom Kippurim, and Rabban Gamliel stands up, and it says, I'm reading the last line because it's beautiful, Amad Rabban Gamliel v'neshako al rosho, and he kisses him on his head. Amar lo, bo b'shalom Rabbi v'talmidi. Come in here, my teacher and my students. Rabbi b'chokhma v'talmidi shekibalta et dvarai. Bo b'shalom Rabbi v'talmidi. Rabbi b'chokhma v'talmidi shekibalta et dvarai. This is how I understand Rabban Gamliel. Bo b'shalom Rabbi v'talmidi. Rabbi b'chokhma means we all know you were right. V'talmidi shekibalta et dvarai. I still have the authority. It's not about who is right. It's only about who decides. Okay, so after we've established that, this makes it even more interesting. Because Kiddush HaChodesh, the power to sanctify the time when it's about the month, is human power. Human beings decide when the month begins. Human beings decide when the month is Kadosh. It's a time created and sanctified by human decision. But there's another unit of time that human beings have nothing to do with. And that time is called Shabbat. There's a Mishnah, for example, in Masechet Chulin, I'm quoting, I'm being the quote, Amar Abaye, Shabbat kvi'a v'kaima. Shabbat is part of creation. It was created by God. Yom Kippurim, Beit Dina kakavile. Yom Kippur is a time that Beit Din, human beings decide when is Yom Kippur. God decides when it's Shabbat. So we have here two systems, the weekly system, the monthly system. Weekly system decided by God. Monthly system decided by the rabbis, by human beings. And I want to start bringing this all back home. What did the rabbis do in Masechet Rosh Hashana? They decided to create a clash between the Shabbat and the Chodesh. What happens if the only way to declare the birth of a month, you have to violate the sanctity of the Shabbat? What's more important, the time created by God or the time declared by human beings? And the amazing answer of the Mishnah is that the Chodesh is way more important than Shabbat, is that we sacrifice Shabbat in order to declare Kiddush HaChodesh. It means we sacrifice the time which is Kvi'a V'kaima, which is part of creation, which was created, defined by God, in order to sanctify the time defined by human beings. This is a very radical declaration of Chazal. And I think this has 10, I'll need a little bit more. Okay? I'll need 15 minutes. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Are we good? Okay.
Always.
Okay. Now I think that historians of Beit Sheni, of the Second Temple, try to understand this position of Chazal in light of a polemic they had with some of the Jews of the time. For instance, the Jews that were hiding in the caves next to Yam HaMelech, next to the Dead Sea, in Qumran. We find many, many calendars and books and copies of the Book of Jubilees. And the Book of Jubilees has a very interesting understanding of time, which is completely opposite than the rabbi's understanding of time. The Book of Jubilees seems to have a metaphysics that the Greeks called kairos. What is kairos? Kairos, I think in Greek, is a moment, but what it means, it carries a metaphysics. It means that time has its own energy. I mean, there's certain moments that have an effect on what will happen in those moments. You see, it's not that something happens in a moment, something happens because it's that moment. Like Friday the 13th, okay? Whoever believes in Friday the 13th, see the movie? Whoever believes in Friday the 13th believes in Kairos. There is a date, there is a moment, bad things happen in Friday the 13th. Why do bad things happen on Friday the 13th? Because it's Friday the 13th. Meaning, it's not that things happen in that date. It happened because it's that date. Now, people that believe in Kairos believe that every day has an energy that shapes the events of that day. The people of Jubilees, the people in the Book of Jubilees, the Jews of the Book of Jubilees, believe that. Now, what is the Torah? The Torah means if every day has its own energy, its own power, the statement there is that the time was written in the tablets of the sky, in Luchot HaShamayim. So what is the Torah? The Torah is to live in harmony with time. Certain things are supposed to happen in Shabbat. Certain things are supposed to happen right in the middle of the month. Certain things are supposed to happen in Yom Kippur. We have to react to time. We have to live in harmony with time. Therefore, if you get the time wrong, that's the worst thing that can happen. Time is objective. Time has power. According to Kairos, we are the slaves of time. We are controlled by time. The rabbis offer here a new approach. We are not controlled by time. We control time. This is a radical approach, a new approach, an alternative to many, many belief systems. That we're not controlled by the energy of time. We control time. We declare time. Besides Yom Kippur. That's the only time. That's Kvi'ah V'Kaima. That's the only part of time that's not in our control. It's in God's control. And then the Mishnah says, yes, but if there is a clash between creating human time or obeying divine time, so we sacrifice Shabbat for Kiddush HaChodesh. In a very deep sense, Masechet Rosh Hashana declares human sovereignty, declares the liberation of human beings from time. We're not controlled by it. We're in control of it. There's a beautiful Mishnah in Masechet Nedarim. Daf Ein Chet Amud Aleph. It describes how in Rosh Hashanah comes cosmically, and God tells all the angels, okay, it's Rosh Hashanah. We have to open the divine court, because we have to now, we have to put the people into judgment. So they build the court, and they open the books on the tables, Sefer HaChaim, Sefer HaMatim, and then they realize that the Jews down there are not going to shul. Why are they going to shul? Because in their false calculations, Rosh Hashanah is only the next day. So you have a gap between the divine, the cosmic Rosh Hashanah, and human. So what does God do? It says in Nedarim, He tells the angels, okay, close the books, close the courtroom. Beit Din will open tomorrow. Because who decides when Rosh Hashanah is are the people, it's not us. Meaning, in some way, we define time. God doesn't define time for us. According to this beautiful story, we define time for God. As it says, Ha'aviru, God says to the angels, Ha'aviru bima, Ya'aviru sanigorin, Ya'aviru skiptorin, Shegazru beit din lemata, lemachar Rosh Hashanah. מהי טעמה? כי חוק לישראל הוא משפט ללא יעקב, אם אינו חוק לישראל הוא כביכול אינו משפט leElokei Yaakov. We decide, Israel decides for Elokei Yaakov. And in Yerushalmi Pesachim, just one last to seal this, it says that Rabbi says that maybe we should end the bracha, Mekadesh Shabbat Israel Vazmanim, meaning when we say that bracha, if Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah happens the same day, you say Mekadesh Shabbat Israel Vazmanim. Amar le, now, there's the other rabbis, they don't like this idea of sealing the bracha, Mekadesh Shabbat Israel Vazmanim. Atu Shabbat Israel Mekad Sheila? Israel, the people of Israel, are we the ones sanctifying the Shabbat? That Shabbat Mikad Vekaima Ela Eima. We just get to the point. We say Shakadosh Baruch Hu Mekadesh Shabbat, and we say Mekadesh Israel Ve'azmanim. It's a different bracha, and the idea is that God Mekadesh Shabbat, Israel Mekadshim et Azmanim. Masechet Rosh Hashanah asks, and what happens if there's a clash between them? The Kiddush, the Zman that Israel Mekadshim, and the Zman Shakadosh Baruch Hu Mekadesh. And Masechet Rosh Hashanah has a radical answer, an unbelievable answer that might lead me to think that Masechet Rosh Hashanah is about liberation of human beings from sacred time, liberation of Jews from God's control. In Rosh Hashanah, in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, we declare human liberty. There's only one problem with that reading. It's only the reading of the first 2 chapters of Masechet Rosh Hashanah. The problem is there's a second half to Masechet Rosh Hashanah. The second half of Masechet Rosh Hashanah deals with Hilchot Tkiyat Shofar. Now, what is Hilchot Tkiyat Shofar about? Hilchot Tkiyat Shofar, and now there's a lot of halachic capital invested in explaining the following thing. The Hilchot Tkiyat Shofar, where Yotzei Yedei Chova, not by the Tkiyah of the shofar, but by the shmi'ah of the shofar. We are mitzuvim, we are commanded to listen to that music created by this very primitive instrument, by the shofar. And then the Mishnah goes in, I realize we're talking about sacred time, and I guess I thought it's human. And you see, the thing is that the Mishnah adds another layer to this. It says not only that Tkiyat Shofar is not about, the mitzvah is not about the Tkiyah, but about the Shmi'ah. You're only fulfilled that commandment if you have a certain kavanah. If you have a kavanah when you listen to the shofar. What is the kavanah? Well, I think the kavanah has an halachic element. It's about your mitkaven, you have attention to perform this mitzvah. That's probably the first layer of kavanah. But I think this Mishnah is trying to say a lot more than that. And I want to now return to Yadav Shel Moshe, which appears in Mishnah Chet. And I want to notice something. I'm now in chapter 3, Mishnah Chet. And I want to recognize something. Mishnah Chet obviously appears after Mishnah Zayin. What happens in Mishnah Zayin? The following. Im kiven libo yatsa, ve'im lav lo yatsa. Af al pi sheze shama veze shama, ze kiven libo, veze lo kiven libo. Making the point that we are yotzeh, we fulfilling the commandment of shmi'ah, of listening to shofar, only if it has kavanah. The next Mishnah is about Yadav Shel Moshe, and Yadav Shel Moshe is a Mishnah about kavanah. Here's my argument. I think this is not a drasha. I think this is pshat. The next Mishnah is trying to explain what does kavanah really mean. What is the kavanah that we really need when we listen to Tkiyat Shofar? And this is what the Mishnah says. It says, if you think that it's Moshe's hands that led to victory, then you think human beings have power. You think it's about our power, our magic, our spiritual muscles. It's about us. We can do it. And the Mishnah says, no, it's not about human power. It's something else altogether. Ela b'sha'a. Ela lomar lecha. שכל זמן שהיו ישראל מסתכלים כלפי מעלה, משעבדים ליבם לאביהם שבשמיים, היו מתגברים, ואם לאו, היו נופלים. It's not about Moses performing his power. It's about the people realizing that only God has the power. Misha'abdim et livam laviem shebashamayim. Meaning, that ritual of Yadav Shel Moshe, it's not an expression of human power. It was an expression that we don't have any power. Misha'abdim et libam. It's about surrendering our power. I think this is, they're trying to say something about Yichot, about Tkiyat Shofar. Tkiyat Shofar is about accepting God's kingdom. The Mizmorim Tehillim that we say before Tkiyat Shofar from Tehillim, למנצח לבני כוח מזמור, כל העמים תיקוק אף, הריעו לאלוהים בקול רינה. עלה אלוהים בתרועה אדוני בקול שופר, זמרו אלוהים זמרו, זמרו למלכנו זמרו, כי מלך כל הארץ אלוהים זמרו משכיל. This is, as biblical scholars notice, this is a mizmor saying that by Tkiyat Shofar we're declaring God is king and we're his slaves. God has the power, we're powerless. Yadav shel Moshe osot milchama is an attempt to say, the real, maybe halachically kavanah, is be aware that you're doing a mitzvah. But the deepest sense of kavanah is that lishma kol shofar is feeling powerless at that moment, surrendering your power, realizing God is in control. Now let's put this all together. The first half of Masechet Rosh Hashana is about Kiddush HaChodesh. The second is about Tkiyat Shofar. Kiddush HaChodesh is about we decide when time is. We sanctify time. We have the power. Tkiyat Shofar is about realizing that you never had power, that God is the king, that you're surrendering to him. Masechet Rosh Hashana puts Kiddush HaChodesh and Tkiyat Shofar in the same Masechet. Masechet Rosh Hashana takes the readers of Masechet Rosh Hashana through Kiddush HaChodesh, where it says we're in control, and the time that we control, we can violate God's time in order to sanctify our time. What a great declaration of human independence. And afterwards we move into Tkiyat Shofar and we remind ourselves that it's not about Yadav Shel Moshe, it's not about expression of human power, it's about surrendering ourselves to God's power. How can we live through Masechet Rosh Hashana? Chazal say, Rabbi Nachman, now in a deep sense, isn't this what Jewish tradition is about? Isn't it that the absolute tension between two impulses? Obviously, Judaism is about the empowering of individuals, the empowering of Jews. We interpret, like we learn in Tanuro Shel Achnai, we interpret the text. We're in control of tradition. We are liberated. We are independent. Our tradition tells us that. At the same time, it's about God. And greatness is about accepting God's kingdom and letting go and surrendering and not being in control. Yes, I know, as an Israeli, that there's so many Israelis and so many Jews in the world that for them, Judaism is only about Kiddush HaChodesh. It's only about us. It's only about self-empowerment and human independence. And yes, I know, there's so many Israelis that for them, Judaism is about, it's not about me. It's not what I think. It's about God. I'm supposed to sacrifice myself, go through the Akedah, the Leibovitch Soloveitchik narrative, Kierkegaard narrative. I'm supposed to accept God's sovereignty. It's not about me. Masechet Rosh Hashana takes us through a journey between Kiddush HaChodesh and Yichot Tkiyat Shofar, where it's about you and it's not about you. It's about being independent from God and it's about surrendering to that God. And can we put this together? Rabbi Nachman Breslev has a, you know what, I'll keep Rabbi Nachman for the end. I'm sure there's some questions.
Well, I want to start by coming back to one of the first things you said, which was that the intent was to bring the entire people of Israel into the project of determining when the month began. So let's go, is one of the very first things you said. And that's a very inclusive and empowering statement. Yet, of course, the Mishnah also cuts out certain groups of people. So how inclusive is it, and how exclusive is it?
This is the question
really?
we got?
This is my first question. As we wait for the rest of the questions, we invite you now to continue with your questions.
Yeah, obviously it's not, the Mishnah is not extremely inclusive. Just to state the obvious, Gentiles not a part of this project, women not a part of this project, slaves not a part of this project, anyone that's pasul edut is not a part of this project. Obviously there's an attempt to turn the sanctity of the month into a national project, and yet the Talmud, they didn't, it takes time for these concepts to develop, and this is a very beginning of the project of inclusivity. They still have a long way to go.
Okay, and so but you're talking about a tension between the first part and the second part. The first part is very empowering of human beings, and the second part is asking them to surrender. So how do you do that?
Exactly. I think part of being, it's not that Judaism is about surrendering to God. It's not that Judaism is about being independent from sacred time and from God. Judaism, in some very deep sense, empowers you to discover yourself. At the same time, inspires you to sacrifice yourself. David Brooks has a great comment. David Brooks, and I think he writes this in The Road to Character. He writes that people in commencement speeches, so he quotes a research, that people try to, they made a research trying to find a shared motif in different commencement speeches. What a great inspirational speakers want to speak to college graduates before they move on to life. And there's one shared motif. There's a lot of material there. There's one motif. Brooks points out, they usually say, go find yourself. Go find yourself. Like life is about exploring and finding myself. Once I find myself, I have to fulfill myself. That is individualism. It's a very important idea. But Brooks says, maybe sometimes we need to tell people to lose themselves. That's also an important idea. To lose themselves. Maybe life is not only about you. To lose yourself inside an idea that's bigger than yourself. An idea that was there before you were born. It will be here after you die. Now, I think it's important to find ourselves, to discover ourselves, to empower ourselves. I think our life is more rich when we can also sometimes lose ourselves and realize our life is not only about ourselves. Masechet Rosh Hashana carries this tension, I think, because our life at its best carries this tension, and Masechet Rosh Hashana is a reflection of our life.
Well, here's a question. I don't have the name of the person. I want to encourage you to send us a few questions in the minutes we have left. Here's a question. Someone did not tell us who they were, but we'll go for it. It's a good question. It says, how did the theology of David Hartman impact your thinking about this issue? David often spoke about religious anthropology and the difference between a religious posture of surrender and submission versus human autonomy and dignity. So this is exactly the questions you were raising. So is there a preference for one or the other? Or
I think whoever wrote this question knows exactly what he or she is talking about. Everything I said now is very Hartman-esque theology, but it's a certain stage in Hartman's development. It's Hartman that wrote a living covenant. In a living covenant, he always opens this tension. He says Judaism is not about deciding. It's about experiencing both sides of this tension. By the way, David Hartman later on wrote different books and a different approach. This theology, this is my attempt to, I guess, in some level of awareness, I was in dialogue with my rabbi, with Hartman, of a living covenant. Thank you for that question.
Okay, so someone has asked us to send them the other text you mentioned, and I will, after this program, I will get all the specifics from Micha, and we will make them available on our website for everybody who really wants to dig more deeply into the texts. So we just have a few minutes left, and I don't have a question right now, so if you'll pardon taking one from me. In fact, you started off by saying, or towards the end, as you close, you talked about Israelis in the current era who have gone to all one side or all the other side. And is there a middle ground? Are there ways that we can bring both of these ends back toward the middle, or has everybody gone off to their own corners now?
Interesting. I see. When there's what does attention mean? Now, attention, there's two poles, two ideas. In a deep sense, you want to hold on to both, and yet they always clash. Now, when ideas clash, it's destructive. But I'll use Hebrew for a minute. There could be nagshut between ideas when they clash, and there could be metach. Metach, attention, is when every idea pushes to a different direction. Now, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, I don't know how you pronounce his name.
Heraclitus, yes.
Heraclitus.
Very,
so he has the idea that the world is like a bow of a warrior. Now, the bow is only effective if every pole pushes as far as it can to the different side, then is the bow effective. I think if I live the notion of Tkiyat Shofar, and it's a major part of myself, and the notion of Kiddush HaChodesh, it's a major part of myself, and they don't clash, they create a tension, I think that's a tension that enriches my religious life. Which takes me to Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman in Breslev offers a drasha, a very creative reading of one line in the chapter of Avot. And I'm quoting now Rabbi Nachman in Breslev, from the book Likutei Moharan. Likutei Moharan, Torah Samech Daled. And Rabbi Nachman offers, he says the following. He reads the sentence in Pirkei Avot. Someone says there, Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim velo matzati laguf tov velo shtika. He focuses on the first part, and he says, Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. And Rabbi Nachman asks the following question. Where did this person grow? Oh, let me translate this, okay? Please. Someone says, my entire life, I've been growing in between scholars. Between scholars. Now one reading would be, of course, when you're surrounded with the scholars, there's an intellectual climate that enables constant growth. That would be a nice reading. Rabbi Nachman offers a different reading. He says the following, Kol chayai gadalti ben chachamim. Rabbi Nachman asks, where did you grow? Where does this person grow? Where is the space of human growth? And he answers, ben chachamim. Not in that space that exists in between scholars. Then Rabbi Nachman asks the following question. What always exists between scholars? What do we always have in that space? When we open the Mishnah, when we open the Gemara, when we study the Talmud, between Hillel and Shammai, Rav Shmuel, Abaye veRava, what always is there ben chachamim? Rabbi Nachman answers what you all probably figured out. There's a machloket. That's what they have there. Ben chachamim yesh machloket. Rabbi Nachman says, Sham gadalti. You don't learn from a rabbi. You grow from the space between rabbis. I think when you grow from a rabbi, so you'll always grow to the rabbi's height. And you'll also be a wannabe, would be his. When you grow in between rabbis, in between scholars, in between ideas, it's your own growth. I think Judaism has a few tensions that create a space that enables a lot of growth. Masechet Rosh Hashana has that space. Masechet Rosh Hashana has a space between Kiddush HaChodesh and Yichot Shofar. It's very subtle. Tkiyat Shofar is halachot that assume, or it's there to create a moment of submission, of surrendering, of declaring God is king, and I'm surrendering. Misha'abdim libam laviyem shebashamayim. Kiddush HaChodesh is about, we're the king. It's about us. We're in control. A graduate of Masechet Rosh Hashana is a graduate of this tension. Now a very interesting question. Is the graduate of Masechet Rosh Hashana a person that could enter Rosh Hashana? Think in a deep sense, Rosh Hashana itself carries all these tensions. Rosh Hashana itself is a moment of surrendering. It's also a moment of self-examining, of celebrating. Rosh Hashana itself carries all these tensions. Rosh Hashana, according to the rabbis, is not the birthday of the world. One last source. I'm all prepared today. In Vayikra Rabbah, Kuftet Aleph, Rabbi Eliezer says that the world was created in Kaf Hei Elul. It was created in Kaf Hei Elul, and the 25th of Elul. Now, what is he trying to say? What is 20th? There is no celebration the 25th of Elul. He is trying to say something. I think he's trying to say that Rosh Hashanah is not the moment where God created the world. It's the 6th day of creation. That's what we're celebrating. If Kaf Hei Elul is Briat HaOlam. So Rosh Hashanah is the 6th day of creation, meaning we're not celebrating the universe, we're celebrating humanity. It's not a cosmocentric celebration. It's an anthropocentric celebration. We're celebrating that we exist, that we're alive. Jerry Seinfeld had once a great joke. I mean, he had many great jokes. But he says, what's the big deal about a birthday? What's the big deal about a birthday? All we're celebrating is a great achievement that someone managed not to die for a whole year. Usually you celebrate that something happened. Like somebody got a report card, a PhD, something happened. Birthdays is when we celebrate that nothing happened. We're celebrating that that person exists. And I think it's very deep. We're celebrating humanity. No achievements, just the existence of humanity. Rosh Hashanah, in a very deep sense, it's the celebration of humanity, and it's a surrendering to the Beit Din. Rosh Hashanah itself carries the tensions of Masechet Rosh Hashanah between Kiddush HaChodesh and Ilchot Kriyat Shofar. In any case, this is my attempt to make some sense out of this very important Masechet.
I want to thank you, Micah. I want to thank everybody who's watched. I know we didn't get to ask all the questions, but as I read through them during Micah's final comments, I think the questions you asked were, in fact, answered by many of his comments. So again, if we didn't get to all of your questions, we apologize, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear them. And we will try and get some of those extra sources that Micah mentioned as well for you fairly soon.
And if not, I apologize because it's Rosh Hashanah.
Well, he's getting ahead of himself, right?
Okay.
We'll apologize in the weeks before Yom Kippur. So this completes our first program. We have 3 more programs this year with 3 other scholars from within the world of the Shalom Hartman Institute. We have programs during Hanukkah, Pesach, and Yom Ha'atzmaut next year, so that get ready. We'll be sending you information about them. I want to thank you for this. I will just finally say, as I think you should know, that this video program will be available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and on our Facebook page very shortly afterward. So if you missed it or want to tell your friends, please do so. Again, thank you very much from Jerusalem, and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.